Part 1. The Cosmic Fear Network was old. It had watched stars die and new ones take their place. For 11,000 galactic cycles, it had served one purpose: to warn the universe about dangerous species. Every spacefaring civilization knew about the network. Every wise species listened to its warnings. The network was not a single being. It was millions of minds linked together across 17 star clusters. Some of those minds were made of flesh. Others were made of light or crystal or things that had no name in any language. But they all worked together, gathering information, studying threats, and sending warnings to anyone who would listen. Their archives contained billions of entries. There were listings for a species of pure hunger that ate everything in its path. There were warnings about the silence, beings that killed by taking away sound itself. There were detailed reports on hive minds, predator species, energy beings, and creatures that existed between dimensions. Each entry came with a threat level and a list of things to do if you ever encountered them. The network had seen every kind of danger the universe could produce, or so they believed. When humanity achieved faster-than-light travel, the network sent an observation probe to the Sol system. This was standard procedure. Every new spacefaring species received the same treatment. A small, nearly invisible probe would orbit their world for one local year, gathering data on their biology, their technology, and their behavior. Then it would return home with its findings. The probe arrived at Earth on a quiet Tuesday morning. It settled into a stable orbit and began its work. It watched humans go about their daily lives. It scanned their cities and their communications. It studied their history and their art. The probe was designed to stay for one Earth year. It returned to the network in 6 standard days. When the probe's data was downloaded, the technicians noticed something strange. Large portions of the memory had been corrupted, not by radiation or mechanical failure, but by the probe itself. Its own programming had tried to delete what it had learned. The senior technicians had never seen anything like it. The probes were designed to gather information, not destroy it. Something in the data had frightened the probe so badly that it had tried to make itself forget. What little information survived was confusing. The humans were soft-bodied creatures with no natural weapons. They had no claws, no fangs, no venom. They could not fly or breathe underwater without machines to help them. Their young were helpless for years after birth. By every biological measure, they should have been prey animals. But there was one phrase buried in the corrupted files that made the technicians stop their work. They read it once, then again, then called their superiors. The phrase was simple: they remember. The network's governing council met 3 hours later. This was unusual. The council normally took weeks to assemble, as its members lived in different star systems. But the message had been flagged as urgent, and so they gathered in a shared mental space, their thoughts connecting across the vast distances of the galaxy. First analyst led the discussion. Was an ancient being, one of the founders of the network itself. Its body was made of living crystal, each facet holding a different thought or memory. In its long life, had studied thousands of dangerous species. It had helped classify the and discovered the weakness of the silence. Nothing in the universe frightened anymore. Or so it had believed. Studied the corrupted data for a long time. Then it announced that it would lead a deeper investigation. The council approved the mission and assembled a team of the network's finest observers. 5 beings, each an expert in studying dangerous civilizations. They departed for the Sol system the next day. They returned 3 cycles later. Only 3 of the 5 observers came back. The other 2 had chosen voluntary dissolution, the network's term for suicide. They had ended their own existence rather than carry what they had learned. Was changed. Its crystalline body, which had always been still and perfect, now trembled constantly. The tremor was visible in every facet, a physical manifestation of an emotion that had believed itself incapable of feeling. Fear. The council gathered again to hear its report. They waited in silence as the first analyst organized its thoughts. When finally spoke, its voice was different, quieter, careful, like someone describing a nightmare while still trapped inside it. The humans, explained, were unlike any species the network had ever encountered, not because of what they were, but because of what they chose to be. They were weak by galactic standards. Any of 1,000 species could kill a human in direct combat, but the humans did not fight directly. They did not need to, because they had developed something far more dangerous than claws or fangs or venomous stingers. They had developed patience, and they had married that patience to spite. The council members shifted uncomfortably. These were concepts they understood individually. Many species were patient. Many species held grudges, but the combination described was something new. When humans encountered a threat, they did not simply react to it. They studied it. They learned its patterns, its weaknesses, its fears. They shared this knowledge with each other through marks on physical materials, a system they called writing. And through this system, they passed their knowledge from generation to generation, building an ever-growing library of how to destroy anything that threatened them. But they did not stop at knowledge. They used what they learned, and they waited until the perfect moment to strike. Shared examples from human history. There was a human leader who had been insulted by another group of humans. Instead of attacking immediately, he waited. He spent years building his strength, learning about his enemies, positioning his forces, and when he finally struck, he did not just defeat them. He erased them from history. He burned their cities, killed their warriors, and sold their families into slavery. He made sure they would never threaten him again. This was not unusual, explained. This was the pattern. Throughout human history, the most successful humans were not the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who could wait the longest, plan the most carefully, and strike with the most precision. The council was troubled but not yet alarmed. Many species sought revenge. Many species could be patient. Surely the humans were not unique in this regard. Tremor grew worse. Its crystalline facets flickered with an emotion that had no name in the network's language. The humans were not unique in seeking revenge, agreed, but they were unique in one critical way. They enjoyed it. Other species took revenge out of necessity. They struck back at enemies to protect themselves or to establish dominance. The revenge was a means to an end. Once the goal was achieved, the anger faded. Humans were different. They did not take revenge to achieve a goal. They took revenge because it felt good. The act of hurting someone who had hurt them gave them pleasure, and the longer they waited, the better it felt. They had a saying for this: revenge is a dish best served cold. Explained what this meant. When humans were wronged, they did not want to strike back immediately. They wanted to wait. They wanted their enemy to feel safe. They wanted them to forget what they had done. And then, sometimes years or decades later, they would strike, not in hot rage but in cold satisfaction. The pleasure was in the waiting. The pleasure was in watching their enemy relax, knowing that punishment was coming. The pleasure was in the surprise on their enemy's face when they finally understood. The council sat in stunned silence. This was not behavior they had ever encountered. This was not something their models could predict. A species that enjoyed calculated violence, that found pleasure in delayed punishment, that cultivated hatred like a crop to be harvested later. Concluded its preliminary remarks with a simple statement. The governing council needed to make a decision. The report it had prepared was classified at the highest level, reserved for existential threats to galactic civilization, but recommended that the classification be changed. It recommended that the report be broadcast to every member species of the network. Every civilization in the known galaxy needed to hear this warning. The humans were coming, and the universe needed to be ready. The council voted. The decision was unanimous. For the first time in the network's history, a species would receive a universal warning before it had made contact with any other civilization. The broadcast began 3 hours later. Part 2. The broadcast reached every corner of known space. It traveled along communication relays and through quantum links and by methods that had no names in human language. Within a single galactic day, 17 billion listening posts had received the message. Species that had been enemies paused their wars to pay attention. Civilizations that had never spoken to each other found themselves united in a single emotion. Fear. Voice filled command centers and council chambers across the galaxy. The first analyst spoke slowly and clearly, making sure every word was understood. What it described would change the way the galaxy thought about danger forever. The report began with context. The humans came from a planet called Earth, the third world orbiting a small yellow star at the edge of an unremarkable galaxy. The planet was covered mostly in water, with patches of land scattered across its surface. It had a single moon and a relatively stable climate. By galactic standards, Earth was not a particularly dangerous world. It had predators, yes, but nothing compared to the death worlds in the outer reaches. Its gravity was moderate. Its atmosphere was breathable by many species. Its radiation levels were normal. There was no obvious reason why its dominant species should be remarkable in any way. The humans themselves were even less impressive. They were soft-bodied omnivores with no natural weapons. They could not run as fast as many of Earth's other animals. They could not climb as well as others. They could not swim as well or fly at all. Their senses were limited compared to other creatures on their own world. They could not see in the dark or hear very high sounds or smell things from far away. Their young were born helpless and stayed that way for years. A human child could not walk for about a year after birth and could not care for itself for many years after that. During this time, it was completely dependent on adults for food, protection, and everything else. This was an enormous investment of resources for a species that could only have a few offspring at a time. By every measure of biology, the humans should have been prey. They should have been food for the larger, stronger, faster predators of their world. They should have lived in fear, hiding in caves and trees, hopping each day to survive long enough to reproduce. Instead, something different happened, something the network still did not fully understand. The humans did not just survive. They dominated. They spread across their entire planet, from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. They conquered every environment and defeated every predator. By the time they developed technology, there was nothing on their world that could threaten them. And they had done it all by being weak. Paused here to let this fact settle in. The humans were not strong. They had no natural advantages, but they had one anyway, and the method they used to win was the reason for this warning. Humans were patient hunters. When they encountered a predator, they did not fight it directly. They followed it, sometimes for days. They walked after it while it ran, using a biological quirk that let them regulate their body temperature through sweating. The predator would run, then stop to rest. The humans would keep walking. The predator would run again. The humans would keep walking. Eventually, the predator would collapse from exhaustion, and then the humans would kill it with simple tools, sharpened sticks, rocks, whatever they could find. This was called persistence hunting, and it was the first sign of what made humans dangerous. They did not need to be faster or stronger than their prey. They just needed to be more patient. They could keep going when their prey could not. They could outlast anything. But this was only the beginning. As humans developed, they began to learn. They noticed patterns in the world around them. They saw that certain plants were good to eat and others were poisonous. They saw that animals behaved in predictable ways. They saw that fire could be controlled and used. And they shared this knowledge with each other. This was the second dangerous thing about humans, their ability to pass information between generations. They developed language, then writing. They created symbols that represented sounds and ideas. They carved these symbols into stone and painted them on walls and later pressed them into paper. Through this system, a human who discovered something useful could share it with every human who came after them. Knowledge did not die with the individual. It accumulated. It grew. Each generation started with everything the previous generation had learned and then added more. The network had seen species with language before. It had seen species that could write. But no other species used these tools the way humans did. No other species was so determined to remember. And what they remembered most carefully was how to destroy their enemies. Presented evidence from human history. It showed how humans had hunted entire species to extinction, not for food, but because those species were inconvenient. There was a bird called the passenger pigeon. At one time there were billions of them. They filled the sky with their numbers. Humans killed them all, not because they were dangerous, because they ate crops and were easy to shoot. There were larger examples. Humans had once shared their planet with other intelligent species. Creatures called Neanderthals and Denisovans, who were stronger than humans and had larger brains. But the humans had been better organized, better at sharing knowledge, better at working together. The other intelligent species were gone now. Only bones remained. The council members listening to the broadcast began to understand. Humans were not deadly because of what they were born with. They were deadly because of what they chose to do. They could not outfight their enemies, so they outthought them. They could not overpower threats, so they outlasted them. They could not win in a single moment, so they won over generations. But was not finished. There was something worse. Humans did not just kill to survive. They killed for other reasons. Reasons that made no sense to the network's analytical minds. They killed for revenge. When a human was wronged, it did not just react. It remembered. The wrong was stored in the human's memory and sometimes in writing as well. It was passed down to children, and entire family lines maintained records of who had hurt them and how. And then, sometimes generations later, the humans would strike back. Shared an example. There was a human group called a family. One of their members was killed by another family in a dispute over land. The killing happened quickly, almost accidentally. Under the rules of most civilizations, this would be the end of it. The killer might be punished, or payment might be made, and life would continue. But the humans did not end it. The first family remembered. They taught their children to remember. And 100 years later, when everyone who had been alive during the original killing was dead, their descendants found the descendants of the killers and took revenge. 100 years, multiple human generations. All that time, the hatred had been carefully preserved, like a precious treasure waiting to be spent. This was what the network could not predict. This was what made humans dangerous beyond any species it had ever encountered. They could hate across time. They could pass their anger from parent to child like a genetic trait. They could maintain grudges longer than some civilizations existed. And they did not just maintain these grudges. They nurtured them. They fed them. They found satisfaction in thinking about the revenge they would eventually take. Its crystal form flickered as it continued. The tremor in its structure had grown worse since returning from Earth. Every time it shared this information, the fear came back fresh. The humans had a concept they called the blood feud. Two groups would harm each other back and forth, each new act of violence creating a need for more revenge. These feuds could last for centuries. They could kill hundreds or thousands of people, and they never really ended. They just went quiet for a while, waiting for someone to remember and start them again. This was not madness. This was strategy. The humans had learned that a reputation for revenge protected them. If other humans knew that hurting you meant your entire family would hunt them for generations, they were less likely to hurt you in the first place. Revenge was not just emotional, it was calculated, it was planned, it was passed down like an inheritance. The broadcast paused to let species across the galaxy absorb this information, then delivered the final part of its evidence, the part that had caused two of its observers to choose death rather than remember. Humans did not just seek revenge against other humans. They sought revenge against anything: animals that had attacked them, natural disasters that had killed their loved ones, diseases that had swept through their populations. They could not truly hurt a disease or a storm, but they tried anyway. They built monuments to their dead. They created stories where the disease was as an enemy to be defeated. They developed medicines specifically to destroy the germs that had hurt them, not just to heal, but to eradicate. Humans held grudges against things that could not even understand what a grudge was. This was the species that was now reaching for the stars. This was the species that would soon make contact with other civilizations. This was the species that the galaxy needed to understand before it was too late. Its broadcast continued to its third and final section: what to do about the humans. Part 3. The third part of the broadcast was the most important, had shown the galaxy what humans were and what they could do. Now it needed to explain how to survive them. The first analyst began with a simple statement. The humans were not the most powerful species in the galaxy. They were not the oldest or the most advanced. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their weapons could barely threaten a proper starship. Their bodies could be killed by almost anything. But none of that mattered. Power was not the same as danger. They were powerful. They could strip a planet of all life in days, but they were predictable. They followed their hunger wherever it led. You could avoid them simply by not being in their path. You could fight them with enough firepower. You could understand them. Humans were different. Humans were dangerous because you could not predict what they would do. You could not know if they would forgive you or destroy you. You could not know when they would strike. You might think you were safe. You might believe that they had forgotten. And then, decades or centuries later, you would discover that you were wrong. Offered the network's first recommendation: do not harm humans. This was not about morality or ethics. This was about survival. Every harm done to a human would be remembered. Every insult, every injury, every slight. It would be written down and passed to future generations. It would become part of their culture, their stories, their identity. And eventually, they would come for you. It did not matter if you were more powerful than them. It did not matter if you could destroy their entire species with a single weapon, because they would not attack you directly. They would wait. They would learn. They would find your weaknesses, the things you depended on, the vulnerabilities you did not even know you had. Then they would strike at those weaknesses, not in anger but in cold precision. They would hurt you in exactly the way that hurt the most, and they would take satisfaction in it. Second recommendation was equally important: do not deceive humans. Human society was built on trust. They formed groups and organizations and partnerships based on the belief that others would keep their promises. When someone broke that trust, humans had a very specific response. They hunted them. Humans had words for those who betrayed trust: traitor, liar, backstabber. These words were spoken with a special kind of hatred, different from their anger toward enemies who had fought them openly. An honest enemy might be forgiven eventually. Someone who had betrayed trust was never forgiven. The network had records of humans pursuing traitors across continents. They had records of humans spending their entire lives tracking down someone who had lied to them decades before. They had records of humans dying satisfied because they had finally punished someone who had broken a promise. If you made a deal with humans and then broke it, they would not simply be disappointed. They would make you their enemy for life. And a human enemy was the worst kind of enemy because they would never stop and they would never forget. Third recommendation was the most disturbing: do not underestimate human patience. Most species in the galaxy were impatient. They wanted results quickly. They took action immediately. They struck while their anger was hot and their advantage was clear. Humans could do that too when they needed to, but they preferred to wait. They had developed the patience of persistence hunters and turned it into a philosophy. There was a human concept called the long game. It meant deliberately choosing a slow path to victory instead of a fast one. It meant making small moves over many years, each one seeming unimportant on its own, but all of them building toward a final goal. Humans admired this strategy. They taught it to their young. They wrote stories about heroes who waited for years or decades before finally defeating their enemies. The waiting was not a burden to them. It was part of the pleasure. When a human decided you were their enemy, they might not attack you for a very long time. They might smile at you. They might trade with you. They might seem like your friend. But all the while they would be watching, learning, preparing. And then, when you least expected it, when you had forgotten that they had any reason to hurt you, they would act. Shared a final piece of human wisdom, a saying that captured everything the network needed to understand. Revenge is a dish best served cold. The first analyst explained what this meant. When humans were first wronged, their anger was hot. They wanted to strike immediately, but they had learned that immediate revenge was often less satisfying than delayed revenge. The pleasure grew with time. The anticipation made the final act. So they waited. They let their anger cool into something harder and sharper. They let their enemy relax and feel safe. And then they struck not from passion but from satisfaction. This was what made humans unique in the known galaxy. Other species might be more powerful. Other species might be more aggressive. Other species might have better weapons or faster ships or more advanced technology. But no other species took pleasure in calculated violence the way humans did. No other species could nurse a grudge for generations while smiling at their enemy. No other species found joy in the cold precision of delayed revenge. Trembling had spread through its entire crystalline form as it reached its conclusion. The first analyst had studied dangerous species for thousands of years. It had never been afraid of any of them, but it was afraid now. The official recommendation of the Cosmic Fear Network was unanimous. Humanity would be classified as a Category Omega threat. This was the highest classification in the network system, reserved for species that posed existential risks to galactic civilization. But even this classification did not fully capture what humans were. Most Category Omega species were dangerous because of what they could do. They could consume worlds. The silence could end all sound in a star system. The void weavers could tear holes in reality itself. Humans were dangerous because of what they would choose to do. They did not have the power to destroy civilizations yet. Their technology was still primitive. Their reach was still limited, but they were patient. They were determined, and they remembered everything. One day, perhaps soon by galactic standards, humans would have the power to match their ambition. They would spread across the stars. They would meet other species. They would make friends and enemies. And any species that made an enemy of humanity would discover what it meant to be on the receiving end of calculated violence. The broadcast ended with a final warning, delivered in trembling voice. Be kind to the humans. Treat them with respect. Honor your agreements with them. Do not give them reason to remember you badly. If you wrong them, they will not react immediately. They will smile and nod and seem to accept whatever has happened, but they will not forget. They will write your name in their records. They will tell stories about you to their children. They will wait. And one day, perhaps years or decades or centuries later, when you have forgotten what you did, when you believe you are safe, they will come for you. Not in hot rage, not in blind fury, but in cold satisfaction, with every step planned and every move calculated and every weakness of yours already known. The universe contained many dangerous things. It contained beings of pure destruction and entities beyond comprehension. But nothing in the known galaxy was quite as frightening as a patient human with a grudge. The Cosmic Fear Network had spoken. The warning had been given. Now it was up to every species in the galaxy to listen. Be kind to the humans. Do not give them a reason to remember your name. And never ever assume that because they are smiling, you are safe.